The main reason why I think it might be a good idea for other entrepreneurs to start creating frameworks is that when you know what you did that worked and there are real tangible steps that were taken, you yourself can repeat these over and over again for different offers, even different businesses, different companies. Anything that I create and test, I now keep, and I keep all of the mini steps in between so that I know how to get from point A to point B. Before my agency started kind of unofficially in 2019, prior to that, I also had a couple of other businesses. Those businesses prior to 2019 don't exist anymore. But I'll quickly run through what they were so I can kind of give a bit of foundation and the context as to why it is I wish I'd created frameworks and memorized and kept track of the frameworks that I was using and the processes that I was following, even if I weren't conscious of these frameworks at the time. I'll go into detail about like what this looks like as we go through this episode. So basically, one of those companies that I had prior to 2019, it was a mix of online and offline services. So it's kind of a hybrid between an online business and a standard service-based business that wasn't online. And the other two, around about the same time, they were standard online businesses where there was info products, blog content, websites, and tripwires and email collection, all that good stuff. But over the course of the 3 years in which I had those companies, so from around mid 2017 up to mid 2019, they were kind of ticking along okay. Even though I'd shut one down, the other two were kind of ticking along okay, but they weren't really making the impact that I wanted to make and that I thought those individual companies would make. And even though they didn't make the impact that I thought they were going to or that I wanted, I did learn a ton of stuff. Like there were some amazing milestones that happened during those first couple of years. Things like first online sale, first converting tripwire, first converting funnel, the first time I collected email subscribers, built an email list, and some other other milestones added into that. Like the first time we ever passed an email list of 10,000 and like so many good stuff, and just some other like mini cool wins along the way, all in the process of like figuring stuff out with building a company online for the first time, second time and third time. But during that entire process, I didn't really track what went well. I kind of knew like what was happening and what was not working, but I never really sat down and kept a process of what was happening. And aside from like the end outcome, so it was like, let's say there's a financial milestone within like a 30, 60 or 90-day period, like we'll just use a quarter as an example. If that goal achieved, if I achieved that goal within the 90 days, then I would consider what I did would work or had worked. But if it didn't, I would just move on to the next thing, and not really understanding the steps and the processes that I was taking. So looking back now, it would have been like, it just would have made a ton of sense to actually track like the system that I was following, even if it was my own and I was making things up kind of as I was moving along and figuring stuff out for myself. Even just to write down what it was that I was working, where I was working from and what I was working towards, so that then I could systematically go through step by step what was happening at each point, because it just would have made things way, way, way easier for a number of reasons, which I'll talk about in a moment. So before I get into like the benefits of like why I wish I'd kept track of the frameworks I was using, I'll just quickly run into like what is a framework. So some people may not know what this is, other people may know it as something else, and then some of you guys listening may have not come across this at all. So essentially it's just a way of organizing a system or process that you've been using or use to help you move from point A to point B. It's essentially, as I mentioned like just a moment ago, it's the equivalent of saying I'm at point A now, which is I have 0 email subscribers, and I want to get to point B, which is I want 1,000 new email subscribers in the next like 90 days. So that's the point where I'm working from. That's the point that I want to be at. But what are the steps along the way that have to happen to move from point A to point B? Because it's the steps in between that are probably like the most important aspects, not just moving from point A to point B. So another way to kind of understand or visualize like what a framework is if you had to teach somebody how to open and launch a beta program and attract 10 paying clients without any social proof, testimonials, case studies, existing client base, or email list, like what would that look like? Like somebody actually asked me this a couple of months ago because this is quite similar to how my agency Pin and Grow started in 2019. We didn't have like anything, no website, social proof, anything. And what would that look like if I was to teach somebody to go from point A to point B? And point A would be no clients, like nothing material to like work from, to go to open and launching a beta program in whatever service or offer that you have in mind, and then the end result being 10 clients. Like if you had to hand somebody a map or a blueprint or a step-by-step process, what would that look like? So point A would be somebody with no idea what to do. They have an idea of something that they want to offer in terms of how they can help somebody shift from point A to point B, but they have no offer in place right now. And then point B would be that same individual who's just signed 10 paying clients for the first time, and they've opened and launched a pretty decent like beta program. That would be point A to point B, but it's also the steps in between that someone would need to take to get that result. Usually, like the way I understand frameworks and what I've been using recently to develop my own frameworks is the steps in between. So the steps from point A to point B, they are usually in sequential order. They're not random. They usually you have to take this step, then this step, then this step, and then let's say there's 10 steps in between. At that 10th step, you would hope and imagine that somebody has achieved that outcome that they're using that specific framework for. So this is kind of like giving some context as to what a framework is, like how it's used, not just like to help somebody else, but also I probably give some context now as to like why we should start creating frameworks sooner and actually keeping hold of those. So it would have helped me make sense of what happens when testing or creating something new. So it's way easier to spot what was probably the reason for something working or not working. Instead of saying, okay, that system didn't work and ruling it out completely, it might well have been the like 50 to 80% might have worked, but it was the 10 to 20% that needed refining and taking out or adjusting to some degree. Perhaps that would have been an easier way to move closer to whatever outcome and whatever objective that I was working on, or like you right now are working on. And instead of scrapping the whole thing, it would have been easier to pinpoint, okay, step number 5 was not needed, or step number 2 was not relevant. Maybe we can take that out and put something else in place. I didn't have any of this. It's not until very recently that I've kind of looked back over the last couple of years and kind of making sense of how things developed organically since 2019, even up until today. I'm now kind of looking back over everything because I didn't have anything written down. I didn't have anything in place. And it just would be easier to have this from day one. So you can test, iterate, and constantly improve something that's already there rather than starting from scratch constantly, which is exactly what I was doing. Probably until like the middle of 2021 when I started to question my own approaches in terms of how I'm developing things and how I'm testing different things. But it's also a way easier way to implement these things over and over again. Like as I mentioned, once you can pinpoint something that does work or didn't work, it's easy to adjust rather than start from scratch again. And this is probably like the main reason, at least for me and in my experience over the last couple of years, is that when I talk about frameworks and see them as they are, it helps me understand them more. So what I mean is, if I can write something down and then I can see this is the way that I got from point A to point B, if I'm then able to like internalize that, not memorize it, internalize this process, if I can then go and help somebody else use the same process by teaching them or even just talking about the system that I've used, it actually helps me understand the thing that I'm talking about at a deeper level. So then it's way easier for me to understand each of the individual steps, what was necessary, and how I got from point A to point B. So I think that kind of makes sense. It's like, I know from my experience, I internalize things in business and my life better if I can talk about them to somebody in a coherent way that makes sense to somebody who has no idea what I'm talking about. And then I can kind of gauge the feedback from somebody that I'm talking to this about. So yeah, if I read and read and read, it helps me memorize things. But then, as I mentioned, if I can then take what I've read and then speak to somebody and even teach somebody what it is that I've done, it just helps things move faster, and I can see what needs to change or not change in some of the cases. And as I mentioned, it's only been probably like between 6 and 12 months now that I'm looking back from the mid to end 2019 that helped Pin and grow, develop organically, and kind of like the way that we expanded, because it's interesting to me as to what happened, and it helps me understand what happens and what did happen, so then we can use and test and iterate different things that happened a couple of years ago and even implement them into something we're doing now, or even something brand new. So this is kind of like the main reason why I think it might be a good idea for other entrepreneurs to start creating frameworks, is that when you know what you did that worked and there are real tangible steps that were taken, you yourself can repeat these over and over again for different offers, even different businesses, different companies. It doesn't really matter. But if you start to, at least if you have some degree of notes that you are using and testing, and to keep those, because if I had those, they would be invaluable right now. It's now I'm having to think back and repeat the process over and over again for something that happened a couple of years ago. And it would have been way, 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 way easier if I'd had these things in place. So then I can look back over what it was that I was doing, and I can easily see what happened. So I just think it makes sense, like once you understand what a framework is, to not only keep track of these, but also continue to develop them, because you will probably end up using some of these frameworks in something else, or even expanding on something that you've already created that works to further improve on again. And now moving forward, after seeing how powerful it is to know what steps were actually taken to get from point A to point B, anything that I create and test now, I now keep, and I keep like all of the mini steps in between, so that I know how to get from point A to point B. So yeah, I have a framework from which I'm operating from, even for everything I'm creating right now. And yeah, if this is brand new to you, then it might be something to consider, to start mapping out, to start keeping track and looking at things like, how did I get from point A to point B? Whether it's something you've done in the past or even something new that you'd like to do moving forward. It's rather than say, I'm at point A today, I want to be at point B in 90 days. What are the specific steps? What are the things I need to take in order to get to that place? And if you are already doing this, that's awesome. So yeah, awesome if you're doing that. So yeah, I hope you found value in that. I hope my intention for today was to share what it was that I had at least kept track of back when I first started building and developing like different aspects of different businesses. I honestly wish I had started to do this back in 2017 and 2018, because I highly suspect things would have moved faster for everything that I've done if I could have at least had some degree of notes or something to look back on. So yeah, that's my intention for this podcast, and I hope you found value in this. See you guys on the next episode.